Përshëndetje and welcome to Inside Albania with me, Alice Taylor. This week I have an exclusive interview with Karl von Habsburg, a former European Parliament politician, an Austrian politician, and the head of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine. This makes him the grandson of the last Austro-Hungarian Emperor Charles I, and he is head and sovereign of the Austrian Order of the Golden Fleece. Now, he was a member of European Parliament for the Austrian People's Party between 1996 and 1999. He's known for his very strong pro-European stance, being part of the pan-European movement, as well as being passionate about cultural heritage. He's also commented many times, including quite recently, on Kosovo, Albania, and the importance of integrating the Western Balkans into the European Union. Karl, thank you. Welcome. Thank you for joining me on Inside Albania, albeit virtually.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
Now, in your recent speech on the future of Europe, you talked about the need for member states to not only coordinate their foreign policy, but you said there's a need for core European institution on this matter. And I wondered, can you expand a bit on this? And would this or could this include hopefuls such as those countries of the Western Balkans?
Well, I think especially the events of the last couple of months, or actually 2 years, has shown to us how important it is to have a real foreign office, a real foreign minister within the European Union to represent the European Union to the outside world. The different national opinions are just not working in the same way anymore as they should. So I really think that's one institution that we are still missing in the European Union in a very, very important way. I mean, if you take just the last couple of days and you see the events that happened, for example, in the United States, the debate about the support that is necessary for Ukraine. And suddenly we figure out that the United States is saying, okay, we are supporting the Ukraine the biggest, and we have to figure out a way. And currently it's very difficult to find a way forward. The European Union actually has done overall much more financial support to Ukraine than the United States. But that never comes up because we know it because we make the calculation, but it is not the European Union speaking with one voice as they should, and which would make them much more important in the world if they actually would. And I think it's just also very important to have what they always call, the telephone number to call in questions of foreign policy. So we should really have that just one vice president who is the spokesman for foreign policy in the framework of the Commission is, in this case, definitely not enough. It is important to have a foreign ministry that is responsible, that basically have to show their responsibility in front of the European Parliament. They should be controlled by the directly elected European Parliament, and that's something we really need. And to your question, whether other countries the countries that are in the application process should be participating in it, I mean, that would be probably taking the second step before the first step. But of course, I have always been a passionate, I would call that, a great European. That means somebody who sees Europe in a great dimension, and therefore I think it is very important to bind those countries in as far as it is possible at the earliest possible moment.
Do you think this sort of foreign office, I mean, currently we have Josep Borrell, who is sort of the outwards facing voice of the institutions. But, we've seen many times recently that the Council, the Parliament, the Commission are not coordinated. We saw it with Gaza and Israel recently. And then obviously there's criticism of the handling of the Kosovo-Serbia situation with Borrell's office and the EEAS. Would this institution that you envisage sort of supersede that, go beyond that, and maybe seek to correct some of the flaws that we're seeing in the current system?
It would definitely go beyond that, because we have to be clear about one thing, and this is if Europe wants to kind of have a position in the world, wants to have a voice that is actually heard, the different national voices are not going to be it. Mm-hmm. It is going to be the European voice that is necessary to take a point. And for that, we need an institution that is not just some spokesperson in the framework of the Commission doing this. We need a foreign minister. We need a person responsible in that framework to speak for Europe and coordinate, not only coordinate, but actually speaks for Europe. And it is completely normal on a national basis that you have the foreign minister who has to go in front of the national parliament and basically defend his policy. And in the European Union, it would be the same. We have a directly elected European Parliament, and any foreign minister would just have to basically present it would be controlled by the European Parliament. So it would be a very normal process, a very normal thing to actually do, and a very necessary thing, as we have seen, particularly over the last couple of months.
And I think, yes, it could help avoid some of the situations we've seen where perhaps the national politics of a certain individual has interfered in their approach to situations.
Definitely.
Although I do fear having this one united voice of the European Union is potentially going to be a bit like herding cats, trying to find out what that position is, amongst so many different divergent voices.
It will be very difficult. That's completely clear. And we see with difficulties that some countries are currently presenting in specific cases, whether it's a question of enlargement or whether it's the help for Ukraine or whether it is specific policy questions. And you see that small individual countries actually can block everything on the long term and have to be brought into something. So, yes, of course, there is a need to correct some of the policies and some of the systems that the European Union actually has, and create a system where the European Union can speak with one voice, especially in foreign politics.
To present a more united front, especially in the current geopolitical context. Now, on the topic of large enlargement, you've said, previously it's been going on for 20 years. There's been very little progress during that time, in particular in the Western Balkans. And I read an op-ed of yours where you said that this was due to national politics. But do you not think the EU is also, I would argue the EU is sort of mainly to blame for this stagnation?
I could argue that too. I mean, it's always the question which type of argument you are taking. It's definitely a question from both sides. I mean, for me, the enlargement as a principle, especially in the direction of the Western Balkans, especially in this direction, is important just when you look at a map. And you see that there's a part of Europe, which is an integral part of Europe, which is already surrounded by the European Union, of different European Union countries, and still is like of a white spot on the map. That really does not make any sense. So It is very important to bring these countries on board and really work on that. Of course, there is resistance against it. There is resistance from, let's say, certain radical groups, right-wing groups, anti-immigration groups, God knows what, that are kind of fighting any type of enlargement. But the question that we have to ask ourselves really is, what is the most important aspect of the European Union? For me, it is very important to see that it is not necessarily the economic dimension, because everybody puts the economic dimension first. But for me, it's a security dimension, which actually has to come first. Because if we don't have stability and security in the framework of the European Union, the best economy does not really help. So we have to put this onto the forefront and say the more we integrate that part of Europe that is not yet part of the European Union, the safer, the more stable all of Europe will become, and the stronger is the voice with which we can actually speak. So I think this question of enlargement is of an enormous importance to us.
Do you think it's a capacity issue as well? With 27 members already, things are difficult, as we've seen in recent months, trying to get decisions through. Do you think states are, aside from the sort of more right-wing and fear of migration, things like that, do you think states are sort of generally worried, how are we going to manage with budgets, with the movement of people, with coordinating decisions and things like this? Do you think that's a key issue as well?
Alice, I'm really don't have very much patience with people in the European Union that talk about capacity issues, because whenever capacity is needed for something, for some topic that suddenly becomes interesting, sexy or whatever, then the capacity suddenly is there. But these are people that do not put our overall European security in the forefront, which should be one of the main goals to create that capacity. So I dare say the capacity is definitely there. The political will is not always there.
Yes.
And of course, without the political will, there are certain things we cannot do. But that means we also have to look very, very carefully at the structure of the European Union and how it is on how it is established and created, and what are the possibilities of some individual countries to put some blocks into the development, enlargement, or any question, the policy question of the European Union. And we have to see how we can put on some corrections also into the framework of the build-up of the European Union.
Now, talking again about progress, there was a comment that caught my eye about Albania and its progress. Obviously, that was tied to North Macedonia for some time. The talks have opened now, but you mentioned that issues with the rule of law in Albania have not helped the situation and are likely to be a stumbling block. Can you elaborate a bit more on that, what your concerns are exactly with Albania and the rule of law?
I mean, I think one concern, which is rather obvious, is the question of corruption. And this is not a secret, and you know it, and I know it, and you talk to people in Albania, and you see how completely natural this actually comes. I think it is important from time to time to have a look on the International Corruption Index, and you can see where the problems actually are. And so certain things just have to be corrected in the framework of the accession process or in the forefront of that.
That was going to be one of my other questions. You know, rule of law issues, corruption issues. Is this something, it's a chicken and egg sort of situation? Should it be fixed before Albania takes more steps, or is it something we should be focusing on more within the accession process? Not just Albania, but other countries as well.
Of course, it should be a precondition to start the accession process, but that's a theoretical thought, because it is something that we have to be realistic. It's not something you can end from one moment to the next. No. When we look at the last different election campaigns we have seen in the area, we always saw that fight of corruption is one of the main election topics. And still we see it does not really work as fast as we probably all would wish it would go. So yes, it is something, it's an ongoing process. And it's an ongoing process, let's be honest, that exists all over the world. It's not only a question of the Western Balkans or Southeast Europe. That's not it. It is just rather rampant in certain countries that have to take steps to kind of reduce that. So yes, rule of law definitely should be a precondition for the accession process. But let's say fight of corruption is, of course, always an ongoing fight.
I want to talk as well about the situation with the opposition in Albania. The opposition, as I'm sure you know, it's splintered. I'm not sure even how many factions there are at the moment. Do you think this is hampering the process? We've had scenes of parliament, fires in parliament and people trying to climb through windows. This can't be helping internationally, sort of the perception of Albania joining the EU. But do you see a solution for this? How obviously we need an opposition that functions, that works. How can we move forward?
Well, I'm definitely not well enough informed to actually analyze this in detail. But of course, I am seeing the general picture that Albania does on the international spectrum. And there is definitely room for improvement. There is no doubt about that.
It's difficult for people here as well who are emigrating en masse, and you have this government, you have a ruling party for 3 mandates and then an opposition. I'm not even sure who's in charge now. Now, you've also spoken on issues in Serbia, not least the recent elections in December, which were highly controversial. A recent European Parliament resolution has also called for decisive action on the situation. What action should be taken? What's your view on this? Why is the EU maybe not putting as much pressure as it should be?
Well, I think one thing which would be very important is that we continue asking from Serbia that they have to tell us where they are standing in certain questions, where they are standing in their relationship with Russia, where they are standing in their relationship with China. Do they want to be an integral part of the European Union? That's a question that I think everybody would answer with yes, but that needs certain preconditions also on the question where you're actually standing. So that's a type of pressure we should put onto Serbia. For me, it was like rather a classic when I saw we had this very ridiculous and unfortunate interview of Tucker Carlson with Vladimir Putin a couple of days ago. And the next stop where Tucker Carlson went to was Serbia. So you see certain streamlines in things happening there, where we have to force Serbia to take a stand and tell us where they are standing on specific topics.
But I don't see that coming from the EU at the moment. I see statements, well, you need to investigate this, you need to tell us that. But I don't see them holding Serbia to account. We have the elections, injury of NATO troops, the Banski attack, non-implementation of agreements, refusal to sign agreements, most recently at the United Nations Security Council, lobbying against Kosovo membership, administrative cleansing of Albanians in Preševo Valley, closeness to Russia. Last week, they had a delegation come from, I think it was the health ministry in Moscow. I think they're being quite clear, but why are the EU not standing up as much as they could be, in your view?
I wish they would. I'm in no position to kind of put on that pressure. I can also ask the question in the same way as you are asking that question. I see that we put the pressure where it is possible to ask that specific question. But yes, also to my understanding, there is definitely not enough pressure on asking Serbia and ask Mr. Vučić exactly where he is standing on specific questions. No doubt about that.
Do you think and I'm asking you because I ask all my guests who I talk about this topic to, is it a matter of them wanting to maybe keep Serbia close? They want to placate in a way. They don't want to ruffle too many feathers to keep them away from Russia. Is it a fear of upsetting Russia? What do you think is behind this?
On one side, definitely, we have to say that Serbia is part of Europe. And of course, on the long run, I would definitely like to see Serbia as part of the European Union. There's no question about that. And I think it is in a mutual interest. It's just when you look at the current position that Serbia is taking on different topics, and you mentioned many of them before, this is not yet the case. But the course is very clear that we have to steer, that we want to integrate Serbia. We want to have Serbia as part of the European Union on the long run, and that probably puts some representatives of the European Union in a position where they say they do not want to shake Serbia up too much. On some of those topics, I think they are so crucial for us that they should be shaken up that much, but it's not happening right now.
No, and it's concerning, especially in the context at the moment of security in the Western Balkans. If you keep allowing these aggressions, these issues, it paves the way for something more serious to happen. Now, and I want to ask about the Banski attack. It was in September. The EU says they've not received a final report. Kosovo says they've handed over all the evidence. Do you think we're ever going to see any accountability for this? Do you think people have forgotten about it?
I don't think people have forgotten about it, because it is something, of course, also with the effect it had on international peacekeepers and with the effect it really had. I think it is not forgotten. But I wish I could help and put a dateline to it when we see some result of that. I'm not sure. I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't either. I hit a stone wall every time I contact the Commission, to the point I've sort of given up now. And it's quite frustrating. Now, Kosovo is celebrating its anniversary of independence. And obviously your involvement in politics, you followed the region as well. We've talked about Albania and its issues with the rule of law, and Serbia and the various challenges it faces. But what about Kosovo? How have you seen its journey over its years of independence? Do you see big improvements, and what do you think needs to be addressed?
I definitely see improvements in it, because it has taken a very good development, but of course it has a very difficult geographical position. It has very complicated neighbors it has to deal with, and it has to deal with one neighbor after the other in the difficulties they're actually having. So I am a professional optimist. So I always see, okay, the end goal has to be, we want also, of course, the Kosovo as a member country inside the European Union. But then, of course, we see certain national interests that are playing into it. Some of them might be justified. Most of them are not justified. I'm mentioning one thing which we all know is a fact, and that's the position that Spain is taking towards the Kosovo and towards the recognition of Kosovo, because they are mixing this up with the problem they are having with which happening in Catalonia. and a kind of drawing parallels, which for me historically are absolutely wrong and have nothing to do one with the other, but it's kind of an emotional issue that is there in existence. So you see certain national, how would I say, they're throwing basically national difficulties are brought up in order to hinder some, I think, very important development of the European Union.
Well, we had, I think it was a couple of days ago, Mitsotakis, he reaffirmed, we are not going to recognise Kosovo as well. And again, this is linked to their own domestic national issues. It's a shame, really. Now, in 2021, before the war in Ukraine, you said that the European Commission rightly states that the admission of Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Northern Macedonia, Montenegro and Serbia to the EU is a geostrategic investment in peace, security and economic growth throughout Europe. Now, this was before the war broke out. Yes. So now we see that Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia are making progress, while Kosovo and Bosnia are still out in the cold. And as you said, there's that spot of the Western Balkans, which is surrounded by the EU. It's still left out. Others are making progress at a snail's pace. Nothing much has changed in 3 years, really. How do you see this panning out? And also, can you talk a bit about Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia and their EU aspirations as well?
I mean, if we're talking about the enlargement as a question on how to deal with our security, then I think, of course, these countries have a tremendous importance, and I'm very happy with the steps that have been taken in question of Ukraine, for example, in questions of the enlargement, of the beginning of the enlargement process, accession process. I'm very happy about the talks that are happening with Georgia. But then again, one point comes up that we have been talking about, which is the question of, is there enough capacity in the European Union to deal with all of that and deal with accession questions of the Western Balkans? And that's where I absolutely am of the opinion that this capacity is there. And if it's not there, then we have to create it, and we have to create it fast, because it is our absolute foremost interest to create an area of security, an area of stability. And for that, we need definitely the Southeast Europe, we need the Western Balkans, but we do also need those parts and those countries that happen to have an unfortunate conflict with Russia. And I'm not only talking about Ukraine, I'm also talking about Georgia, an unfortunate neighborhood in this case, and we have to help them, we have to support them, because we want them as part of Europe. So I really think it's not just saying the capacity is not there, is just a lame excuse, nothing else.
But do you think the progression of these three countries, Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia, it could potentially upset the Western Balkans, who've been waiting very, very, very long time, and they're seeing these three countries sort of ready to leapfrog them? Is this not opening another potential can of worms?
I really hope it is not. I mean, as I said, we have to constantly emphasize that the security questions is one of the most important elements that we have to deal with in order to create the stability so the economy can work. So in this case, we need both. We cannot say, oh, we don't have capacity, or some countries are overtaking others. No, that should not be the case. I don't want to put those countries that you mentioned as last in line, or them leapfrogging the countries of the Western Balkans. That is both wrong. We should have the capacity to deal with both at the same time.
Yes, I agree. Now, I want to mention something that came up this week and caused a huge stir in Europe, and that was some comments from Donald Trump about NATO. And, if countries aren't going to spend their 2% of the GDP on defense, to meet the threshold of NATO, then Russia can do what the hell they want. And this sent Europe into a bit of a meltdown, and people are pulling out contingency plans. And I think he was just maybe speaking without sort of really thinking about what he was saying. I would like to think, but what is your view on what he said? Are we going to see, if he becomes president, are we going to see an end to NATO as we know it? What impact is this going to have on Europe and the Western Balkans?
I mean, if you take his statements and look also at the other statements he made at the same speech, you could say that he was just catering to the crowd. It is a very local crowd within the United States that he was catering to. And he was definitely not thinking when he was saying this, because it is so stupid that I don't even know how to talk about that. Because, of course, if you take the mutual assistance out of NATO does not make any sense anymore. So this assistance system has to be absolutely in place. Otherwise, really, that's the core business of NATO, and kind of to try to scratch this out, that is something that does not work and does not fly. But I think this was, of course, part of campaigning and real stupidity, like many other things he mentioned in that speech. But on the other side, of course, sometimes I'm quite happy when we are shaken awake and say we have to deal also with our own security to some extent, and not only rely on the United States. And some countries are definitely doing it. When we are seeing today what, for example, a country like Poland or the Baltic countries, in part also far too late and very slowly Germany and some other countries are doing to kind of ramp up their own security, put the security question more into the center, I think that is something which is quite important and sometimes quite healthy when there's a bit of a shake-up, and be more aware of the problems there are and get to it. The 2% is not written in stone. It is just something that should be reached, and I do generally agree with the concept that 2% of the budget should be reached for defense and for security. Wherever it's possible, some countries just cannot do it. I'm quite aware of that, but many countries could do better than they are currently doing. And some countries have shown how it can really work, like, for example, Poland or the Baltic countries, or also Germany to some extent.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think it was something he said without really realizing, but I think it was good because now everyone's going, oh no, we need to spend more. We need to ramp up domestic production of our own weapons. We need to increase our defense. We need to work together more. Now we are running out of time, but I did want to ask another question, which is not so politics based. You are known for your work with cultural heritage and preserving cultural heritage, and Albania is rich with it. And I couldn't find an answer to my question. Have you been to Albania?
Yes, I've been to Albania.
Yes?
I had the luck to be to Albania quite often. I mean, even at the time when I was in the European Parliament, I was part of the delegation in charge of Albania. And at that time, I had the possibility to travel there a couple of times. And I went there on holiday a couple of times. So yes, I've been to Albania quite a bit.
And in terms of cultural heritage here, what are your views and impressions?
It is tremendous. It is fantastic because, of course, it is an area that over the last millennia has been a territory that has been crisscrossed by many cultures. And this always means a great richness of culture that actually is present. But what I think is very, very important also in Albania is not only the tangible cultural heritage, but also the intangible cultural heritage. There are lots of, local costumes, habits, things like this, which one should definitely protect and preserve. And I mean, there is the 2003 Convention of UNESCO that is dealing with this question. So there is so much richness in that culture. So that is tremendous. That's fantastic.
And you must have seen quite a change here over the years. What year did you first visit?
The first time, I think I went in 94.
Oh, wow.
So actually quite some time ago. Yeah.
And what is your impression from 94 to the last visit you made? How big has the transformation been?
It's absolutely tremendous, and we have good friends in Albania. So I mean, one can definitely see on how fast this process is going, and so that's why I'm always an optimist in this question.
Karl, thank you so much for your time today, and I hope to see you in Albania one day.
Pleasure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
That's all for this week. You can watch Inside Albania every Saturday at 5 o'clock on Euronews Albania. You can watch all our past episodes on our YouTube channel and across all major podcasting platforms. Mirapavsim.